The invitation arrived on a crisp fall afternoon, tucked neatly into a gold-embossed envelope that practically screamed exclusivity. My wife, Lucy, spotted it first, her eyes lighting up with a mix of excitement and awe. She waved it at me like a lottery ticket. "Mark, this is it," she said, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. "A weekend retreat on a private island. It's hosted by William Fellows, the biggest client our firm has ever landed." I studied the invitation. A weekend of luxury with a handful of executives and their partners. Everything would be provided: private jet transportation, 5-star accommodations, gourmet meals. It sounded incredible, but something about it gave me pause. Lucy couldn't stop talking about it. She described William Fellows in vivid detail, painting a picture of a man who seemed larger than life. "He's in his mid-40s, super wealthy, and ridiculously charming," she said. "He looks like George Clooney, but taller." "Fantastic," I muttered, trying to focus on the project I was working on. "What's that supposed to mean?" she asked, narrowing her eyes. "Nothing," I said, waving it off. "It just sounds excessive." She rolled her eyes. "This could be a huge opportunity for us, Mark. For me. William's a big deal, and Jack, our CEO, wants us both there. It's networking." I didn't press the issue. The truth was, Lucy was already sold on the idea, and I didn't want to argue. The prospect of a luxury getaway wasn't exactly unappealing, even if I felt a strange undercurrent of unease. 2 weeks later, we were boarding a private jet with a handful of other couples from the firm. Jack Edwards and his wife sat near the front, chatting with a director and his partner. Lucy, dressed in a crisp linen jumpsuit, looked effortlessly stunning. She had always had a way of commanding attention without trying, a quality that drew people to her like moths to a flame. As we flew over endless blue ocean, William Fellows Island came into view, a crescent of white sand and emerald jungle framed by turquoise waters. It looked like paradise. When the plane landed, we were greeted by a team of staff who whisked us away in golf carts to our individual villas. Lucy was practically glowing with excitement as we stepped into ours, a sprawling suite with a private pool and panoramic views of the ocean. "Can you believe this?" she said, twirling around the room. "It's like something out of a movie." "It's incredible," I admitted, though my unease lingered. Something about the whole setup felt too perfect, too orchestrated. I shook it off, telling myself I was overthinking things. The first evening was a formal dinner on the veranda overlooking the bay. William made his entrance with the kind of charisma that immediately filled the room. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with silver-streaked hair and an easy smile. When he spoke, people leaned in to listen. "Thank you all for joining me this weekend," he said, raising a glass of champagne. "You've worked hard to get where you are, and I wanted to give you all a chance to relax and unwind. This island is yours to enjoy." His gaze lingered on Lucy as he spoke, and she smiled back, a little too brightly for my liking. I tried to brush it off, reminding myself that he was our host and she was being polite. The evening unfolded like a scene from a dream. The food was exquisite, the drinks flowed freely, and the atmosphere was warm and convivial. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. William was attentive to everyone, but his attention to Lucy seemed different. Subtly so, but enough to set off alarm bells in my mind. That night, as we lay in bed, Lucy was unusually affectionate. Her kisses were hungry, her touch insistent. I wanted to lose myself in the moment, to believe that everything was perfect. But as we fell asleep, the niggling doubt in the back of my mind refused to quiet. The next day, we spent the morning snorkeling in the bay. Lucy was in high spirits, laughing and joking with the other guests. William joined us, effortlessly charming everyone with his wit and humor. I found myself feeling irrationally competitive, trying to match his charisma, but it was like trying to outshine the sun. He was in his element, and I was just another shadow. At lunch, I noticed Lucy and William in deep conversation, their heads bent close together. She was animated, her hands gesturing as she spoke. I tried to ignore the pang of jealousy that flared in my chest. After all, this was her job, to build relationships with clients. But when I approached them, the conversation abruptly stopped, and they both looked at me with expressions I couldn't quite read. "Hey," I said, forcing a smile. "What are you two plotting?" "Just talking shop," Lucy said breezily, but she avoided meeting my eyes. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but the sense of unease stayed with me. That evening, at another lavish dinner, William proposed a toast to Lucy, thanking her for her hard work and dedication. The room erupted in applause, and Lucy flushed with pride. She reached for my hand under the table, but I pulled away, suddenly feeling like an outsider in my own marriage. As the night wore on, the laughter and chatter blurred together, the edges of the evening softening with wine and fatigue. I watched Lucy from across the room, her face lit up with laughter as she spoke to William. For a moment, I saw them as if through a stranger's eyes, a beautiful woman and a powerful man, their connection electric and undeniable. I excused myself early, retreating to the villa under the pretense of a headache. But as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't ignore the gnawing suspicion that something was happening between them, something I wasn't ready to confront. When Lucy finally came back, hours later, her cheeks were flushed, and her smile was soft and dreamy. She slid into bed beside me without a word, her hand resting lightly on my chest. I closed my eyes, pretending to sleep, but my mind was racing. Something wasn't right. And I was going to find out what. The next morning began in stark contrast to the idyllic setting of the island. The sun spilled through the villa's floor-to-ceiling windows, but the warmth it brought felt foreign. My chest was heavy, my mind restless. Lucy woke up before me, humming softly as she moved about the room. Her cheeriness seemed forced, almost as though she was overcompensating. "I'm heading to breakfast early," she said, slipping into a summery dress that hugged her figure. "William wants to discuss some ideas for his company's rebranding." "Rebranding?" I asked, my voice tinged with skepticism. "I thought this weekend was about relaxing." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "It's just a quick chat. I'll see you by the pool later, okay?" I nodded, masking my unease, and watched as she left. The moment the door clicked shut, I reached for her phone, which she'd left charging on the nightstand. It was a move I'd never made before in our marriage, but something in my gut told me I wouldn't regret it. The phone was locked, of course. I stared at it for a moment, the internal debate raging in my head. Then, as if on cue, a notification appeared, a message from someone saved as WF. The preview read, "Looking forward to spending more time with you today." My stomach dropped. I tapped the notification, but it required her passcode. My first attempt, a combination of our anniversary date, failed. So did my second. Frustrated, I put the phone back, trying to calm the storm brewing inside me. I needed more than vague suspicions. After throwing on some clothes, I decided to go to breakfast myself. The dining area was alive with the chatter of other guests, but Lucy and William were nowhere in sight. My heart thudded as I approached Jack Edwards, who was laughing over coffee with his wife, Margaret. "Morning, Mark." Jack greeted me, his face flushed from the morning sun. "Lucy's with William." They stepped into his office for a private discussion. I nodded, forcing a smile. "Just wanted to check in." "Thanks, Jack." The word private echoed in my ears as I left the table. My mind churned with questions. What could they possibly be discussing that required privacy? More importantly, why hadn't Lucy mentioned this meeting to me? I wandered toward the main building where William's office was located. The door was ajar, and I could hear their voices. They weren't loud, but they carried a certain intimacy that made my skin crawl. "You've been incredible this weekend, Lucy," William said, his voice smooth as silk. I don't think I've ever met someone as intuitive as you. You flatter me too much, Lucy replied, laughing lightly. I clenched my fists, debating whether to storm in or wait them out. Before I could decide, the door opened, and Lucy emerged, her face glowing. She froze when she saw me. Mark. What are you doing here? I was just looking for you, I said, trying to sound casual. Everything okay? She hesitated, just for a moment, but it was enough to confirm my fears. Of course. William and I were just discussing some ideas for his campaign. Right, I said, my tone sharper than intended. Next time, maybe let me know where you're disappearing to. Her expression hardened, and she brushed past me without another word. As she walked away, I couldn't help but notice William standing in the doorway, watching her with a smug smile. The rest of the day passed in a haze. Lucy avoided me, claiming she needed to work on some notes William had given her. I spent hours by the pool, pretending to enjoy the sun while my mind replayed every suspicious interaction between them. That evening, during dinner, Lucy was unusually quiet. Her usual charm seemed muted, and she barely touched her food. I waited until we were alone in the villa before confronting her. Lucy, I began, my voice steady. What's going on with you and William? She looked up sharply, her eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? You've been spending a lot of time with him, I said. And the way he looks at you, it's not professional. She scoffed, but there was a flicker of guilt in her expression. Don't be ridiculous, Mark. William is our client. Of course, I'm going to spend time with him. Time that you don't tell me about. I countered. Private meetings. Secret messages. Her face flushed, and she stood abruptly. You're being paranoid. I don't have to explain myself to you every second of the day. The argument escalated quickly, voices rising and words cutting deeper. By the end of it, Lucy stormed out, slamming the door behind her. I sat on the edge of the bed, my heart pounding. This wasn't just paranoia. Something was wrong, and I needed proof. The next morning, I made my move. While Lucy was out with the group for a kayaking excursion, I slipped into William's office. The staff were busy preparing for another day of activities, and no one noticed as I shut the door behind me. The office was sleek and minimal, with a polished desk and a single laptop. My hands shook as I opened it, hoping it wasn't password protected. Luck was on my side. The desktop was accessible, and I quickly found a folder labeled Guests. Inside were dozens of subfolders, each named after the attendees. I clicked on Lucy's. What I found made my blood run cold. Photos of her, some candid, some clearly taken without her knowledge. Emails exchanged between her and William, the tone growing increasingly personal. One in particular caught my eye. I can't stop thinking about you. Can we talk tonight? I closed the laptop, my mind racing. The evidence was damning, but I needed more. I grabbed my phone and took pictures of the screen, documenting everything. Then I left the office, my heart pounding. Back at the villa, I waited for Lucy to return. When she did, I confronted her, showing her the photos. Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she tried to find words. Mark, I can explain. Don't, I interrupted. I've seen enough. Her defenses crumbled, and she sank into a chair, her head in her hands. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. I stared at her, the woman I'd loved for years now a stranger to me. It never is, I said coldly. For the rest of the evening, we barely spoke. My anger simmered beneath the surface, but I held it back, knowing there was still one final confrontation to come, with William. And I intended to make it unforgettable. The next morning dawned with a strange stillness, the kind that precedes a storm. Lucy and I avoided each other entirely. She left early, claiming she needed space to think, and I was grateful for the reprieve. It gave me time to strategize. I had no intention of leaving this island quietly. William Fellows wasn't just some ordinary man, he was calculated, controlling, and arrogant. He thought his wealth and charm made him untouchable. But he'd underestimated me. After breakfast, I tracked down Jack Edwards, our CEO, who was chatting with some of the other directors by the pool. Jack greeted me warmly, oblivious to the turmoil brewing beneath my polite smile. "Jack, do you have a minute?" I asked, my tone light but urgent. "Of course, Mark," he said, stepping away from the group. "What's on your mind?" I hesitated for a moment, weighing my words. "It's about William." Jack's expression darkened slightly, and he crossed his arms. "What about him?" "I think you should see something," I said, pulling out my phone. I showed him the photos I'd taken from William's laptop, along with the incriminating emails. Jack's face turned ashen as he scrolled through the evidence. This is unacceptable," he muttered. "How did you get this?" "That's not important," I said. "What matters is what he's been doing, manipulating Lucy, making advances under the guise of business." Jack pinched the bridge of his nose, clearly torn. "We can't afford a scandal like this. William is a major client. If this gets out..." "With all due respect, Jack," I cut in, "this isn't just about business. It's about integrity. If you don't confront him, I will." Jack sighed heavily, but eventually, he nodded. "Fine. I'll handle it. Meet me in the conference room at noon. Bring Lucy." The hours leading up to the meeting were torturous. I replayed every interaction, every look, every word exchanged between Lucy and William. My anger simmered, but so did my resolve. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about reclaiming my dignity. When noon arrived, I found Lucy sitting alone on the veranda, staring out at the ocean. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Jack wants us in the conference room," I said, my voice flat. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading. "Mark, please. I made a mistake, but..." "We'll talk later," I said, cutting her off. "Right now, we need to go." We entered the conference room together, the air thick with tension. Jack was already there, his jaw tight as he sipped a cup of coffee. Moments later, William strolled in, his usual air of confidence unshaken. "Ah, Jack," William said, flashing his trademark grin. "What's this all about?" Jack didn't waste any time. "William, we need to discuss something serious. Mark has brought some troubling information to my attention." William's smile faltered, but only slightly. "Troubling? I'm not sure I follow." Jack gestured for me to speak, and I stepped forward, my phone in hand. I showed William the photos and emails, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "Care to explain this?" I asked. For a brief moment, William's mask slipped. His eyes flicked to Lucy, then back to me. But he quickly regained his composure, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "Mark, I think you're overreacting. These emails were harmless. A bit of flirtation, maybe, but nothing more." "Nothing more?" I snapped. "You call manipulating my wife and abusing your power harmless?" William shrugged. "Lucy's a grown woman. She made her own choices." Lucy flinched at his words, her face crumpling as if he'd slapped her. "You promised this wouldn't happen," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "Lucy, don't," I said, my voice cold. "You don't get to play the victim here." Jack cleared his throat, his expression grim. "William, this behavior is completely unacceptable. I can't in good conscience continue this partnership." William's smirk disappeared entirely. "Are you serious? Do you have any idea what severing ties with me will cost your firm?" Better than I know what keeping you will cost us, Jack said. I expect you to leave the island by this evening. William stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He turned to Lucy, his voice dripping with venom. You're not worth this, he spat before storming out. The room was silent for a long moment after he left. Lucy buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Jack looked at me, his expression a mix of pity and admiration. I'll handle the fallout, he said. Take care of yourself, Mark. Lucy and I walked back to the villa in silence. She tried to speak several times, but I didn't want to hear it. My focus was on packing and getting off the island as quickly as possible. That night, as the private jet soared above the ocean, Lucy finally broke the silence. Mark, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I... You're right, I said, cutting her off. You don't. She stared at me, her eyes brimming with tears. I made a mistake, but I still love you. I laughed bitterly. Love? You call this love? Her tears spilled over, but I felt no sympathy. The betrayal was too deep, the wounds too fresh. As the plane touched down, I knew one thing for certain, my life would never be the same. But it was mine again, and for the first time in years, I felt free. The weeks following the island debacle were surreal. Lucy and I returned to our home, but it was as if a physical barrier separated us. We barely spoke, navigating the same spaces like strangers. I filed for divorce the week after our return, determined to close this chapter of betrayal. Lucy didn't fight it. She simply nodded when I handed her the papers, her eyes hollow and defeated. I'm sorry, Mark, she said softly. Not as sorry as I am, I replied, walking away. Life moved on, though not easily. I poured myself into work, using the chaos of my job to distract me from the emotional wreckage. Friends and family rallied around me, offering their support and outrage on my behalf. They called Lucy all sorts of names, but I found no satisfaction in their anger. I was simply exhausted. One day, about 3 months after everything fell apart, I received an email from Jack Edwards. The subject line read, Update on William Fellows. My stomach churned as I opened it. Mark. I thought you'd want to know, William's behavior didn't stop with Lucy. Since we severed ties with him, several other women from the firm have come forward with similar stories. He's facing lawsuits now, and his reputation is in tatters. It looks like justice is catching up to him. Thought this might bring you some peace. Take care. Jack. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a breath I didn't know I was holding. The news brought a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. William was finally facing the consequences of his arrogance and manipulation. But the email also stirred something else, curiosity. If Lucy had been just one of his many conquests, was her betrayal truly about him? Or was there something deeper I had missed? 2 weeks later, Lucy called. It was the first time we'd spoken since I moved out. Mark, I need to talk to you, she said, her voice shaky. What is it? I asked, bracing myself for more drama. Please, can we meet in person? Just once. I need to explain something. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe near our old home. Lucy looked different, worn, but determined. She sat across from me, her hands clasped tightly around her coffee cup. I know I have no right to ask for your time, she began. But there's something you need to know. Something I didn't tell you. I folded my arms, skeptical. Go on. She hesitated, her eyes searching mine. William wasn't the first. The words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, my mind racing. What are you saying? Her voice trembled. There was someone else. Years ago. It didn't last, but it wasn't just a mistake. It was a pattern, Mark. A symptom of something broken in me. I sat back, stunned. All this time, I had focused my anger on William, convinced he had manipulated her into betraying me. But now, I saw the truth. Lucy had been sabotaging our marriage long before the island. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice cold. Because I'm getting help, she said. Therapy. For the first time, I'm facing the things I've done. I know it's too late for us, but I wanted you to know that I'm trying to change. Not for you, for me. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to walk out, to leave her to her guilt. But another part, a small, reluctant part, felt a flicker of understanding. Not forgiveness, but a recognition of the pain she carried, the cracks that had always been there but I had never seen. Good luck, Lucy, I said finally. I hope you find what you're looking for. A year later, I stood in the same cafe, waiting for someone else. Her name was Emily, a colleague I had started seeing a few months ago. She was kind, funny, and refreshingly honest. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. As I sipped my coffee, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was an email from a name I didn't recognize. Curious, I opened it. Subject: You deserve to know. Mark. I've debated sending this message for months, but I can't keep it to myself any longer. My name is Claire, and I'm one of the women who worked with William Fellows. Like Lucy, I was manipulated by him, but there's something more. After your confrontation on the island, William made a final attempt to hurt you. He sent me something, a photo. It's of Lucy and him, taken long before the island trip. It was meant to destroy you, but I couldn't bring myself to forward it. I'm sending it now because I think you should have the truth. Maybe it will bring you closure. I'm sorry. Claire. I stared at the email, my pulse pounding. Attached was a single image. With trembling fingers, I opened it. It was a photo of Lucy and William in an intimate pose, unmistakably taken in our home. My heart dropped as I recognized the date on the photo, 6 months before the island retreat. Long before I had suspected anything. The betrayal ran deeper than I had ever imagined. I deleted the email, my chest tight but my resolve firm. The past was the past, and I refused to let it define me any longer. Emily arrived moments later, her smile brightening the room. I smiled back, determined to move forward. Some wounds never fully heal, but they can teach you how to survive, and thrive.